Welcome to BeFM Drama, where we turn some of the greatest works of English literature into gripping radio. Continuing with our series of classic Sherlock Holmes stories by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle this week, we'll be bringing you our 5-part adaptation of the Stockbroker's Clerk, a bizarre mystery that follows a friendly and well-meaning London financial clerk as he becomes entangled in a strange and unnerving scam, one that has him wondering if he's merely been the victim of a petty prank or if he's become a pawn in something much more sinister. From our studio here in Busan, my name is Joshua Cornwell, and I'm the host and writer of this program. This week, I'll be joining you as the voice of Dr. John Watson, Sherlock Holmes' faithful friend and chronicler, who serves as the narrator in almost every Sherlock Holmes story published by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle in his lifetime. And now, without further ado, please join me on the faraway cobbled streets of Victorian London as we kick off the week with Episode 1 in The Stockbroker's Clerk. Shortly after my marriage, I had bought out a medical practice in the Paddington district. Old Mr. Farquhar, from whom I had purchased it, had at one time an excellent general practice, but his old age had made it difficult to keep up with his patients. Thus, as my predecessor weakened, his practice declined, until when I purchased it from him, its profitability had decreased from £1,200 to little more than £300 a year. I had confidence, however, that with my youth and energy, I would be able to re-establish a flourishing business within a year or two. For 3 months after taking over the office, I was kept very busy by my work and saw little of my friend Sherlock Holmes. I was much too busy to visit Baker Street, and he seldom went anywhere by himself, except on a case. You will understand my surprise, therefore, when, one morning in June, as I sat reading the British Medical Journal after breakfast, I heard a ring at the bell, followed by the rapid, somewhat strident tones of my companion's voice. A moment later, his tall figure strode into my waiting room.
Ah, my dear Watson, I am so delighted to see you. I trust that Mrs. Watson is doing well.
Thank you. We are both very well. Holmes settled down into a comfortable rocking chair with a sigh.
And I hope also that the stress of medical practice has not entirely obliterated the interest which you used to take in our little investigative problems.
On the contrary, it was only last night that I was looking over my old notes and thinking about our old adventures.
I hope that you don't consider your collection finished.
Not at all. I wish nothing better than to have more of such experiences. Medical practice is all well and good, but it doesn't offer quite the same excitement as your own line of work.
Would today suit you for such an experience?
Yes, today, if you like.
And as far off as Birmingham?
Birmingham? Well, it's not exactly around the corner, but certainly, if you wish it.
And will your practice get on all right without you?
I've a doctor friend next door who owes me a favor. I'm sure he would be happy to look after my regular patients for a day or two. It's all been fairly quiet and routine at the moment. Rather boring, to be honest.
Ha! Nothing could be better.
Holmes leaned back in his chair and looked me over keenly with his sharp eyes.
I perceive that you have been unwell lately. Summer colds are always unpleasant.
I was confined to the house by a severe chill for 3 days last week. I thought, however, that I had fully recovered. Surely I don't look ill.
No, you have recovered entirely. You look remarkably robust, stout even. Married life suits you, Watson.
How, then, did you know of my illness?
My dear fellow, you know my methods.
You deduced it, then?
Certainly.
And from what? From
your slippers.
I glanced down at the new leather slippers which I was wearing. How on earth do you know these things, Holmes? It's as if you're some kind of wizard. Sometimes I wonder if you've made some kind of Faustian pact in exchange for these powers. Holmes chuckled.
Hardly anything so outlandish, my friend. Your slippers are new. You could not possibly have had them more than a few weeks. The soles which you are at this very moment pointing towards me are slightly scorched. For a moment I thought they might have gotten wet and then been burned and dried by the fire. But near the instep there is a small circle of paper with the price of the slippers still written upon it. Too high, I'm afraid. Damp would of course have removed this. You had therefore been sitting with your feet stretched toward the fire, which a man would hardly do in June if he were in full health.
Like all Holmes's reasoning, the thing seemed simplicity itself when it was explained. He read the thought upon my features, and his smile had a tinge of bitterness.
I'm afraid that I rather undercut myself when I explain my thinking. It's a poor wizard who explains his magic tricks. You're ready to leave for Birmingham, then?
Certainly. What is the case?
You shall hear everything on the train. My client is outside in a carriage. Can you come at once?
In an instant. I scribbled a note to my neighbor, rushed upstairs to explain my business to my wife, and joined Holmes upon the doorstep. Holmes nodded at the name and business plate mounted beside the door of my neighbor.
Your neighbor is a doctor?
Yes. He bought out a medical practice just as I did.
A well-established one?
Just as old as mine. Both have been here ever since the houses were built.
Ah, then you got hold of the better of the two.
I think I did. But how did you know?
By the steps, my boy. Yours are worn down 3 inches deeper than his.
We walked outside into the muggy dampness of a London June and entered the waiting carriage, where a young man sat waiting for us.
Watson, this gentleman in the cab is my client, Mr. Hall Pycroft. Allow me to introduce you. Let us make haste, for we have only just enough time to catch our train.
The man whom I found myself facing was a well-built, fresh-faced young fellow with a frank, honest expression and a slight, crisp yellow mustache. He wore a very shiny top hat and a neat suit of black, which made him look what he was, a smart young city man of the hard-working urban class that gives us our crack volunteer regiments and the fine athletes and sportsmen who are the pride of these islands. His round, ruddy face was naturally full of cheerful friendliness, but the corners of his mouth seemed to me to be pulled down with the strain of a nagging distress. It was not until we were all seated together in a first-class carriage and well on our way north towards Birmingham that I was able to learn what the trouble was that had driven this fine young man to Sherlock Holmes.
We have a clear run of 70 minutes before our next stop. I want you, Mr. Hall Pycroft, to take advantage of this idle time by telling my friend your very interesting experience, exactly as you told it to me this morning, with even more detail if possible. It'll be helpful for me to hear the whole chain of events again. It is a case, Watson, which may prove to have something serious in it, or may prove to be nothing sinister at all. Either way, it presents some of the most unusual and bizarre features that are so dear to my heart and so valuable in your writing. Please, Mr. Pycroft, tell your story. I shall not interrupt you again.
Our young companion looked at me with a twinkle in his eye.
The worst of the story is that I come off as such a confounded fool. Of course, it may work out all right, and I don't see that I could have done anything differently, but if I have lost my livelihood and get nothing in exchange, I will feel foolish indeed. Now, I'm not very good at telling a story, Dr. Watson, but it goes like this with me.
With that, we've come to the end of the first episode in our 5-part adaptation of the Stockbroker's Clerk here on BeFM Drama. What misfortune has befallen this friendly young man, Mr. Hall Pycroft, and why has his story compelled the great detective Sherlock Holmes to call on Dr. Watson and drag him to Birmingham, a city far from the streets of London that the good doctor calls home? When you join us here tomorrow for part 2 of this program, we'll begin to unravel the strange mystery that has arrested the great detective's attention.